Welcome to the Steve Show. Today I have Maria Matarelli here, and she is on the show because I just met her at the National Speakers Association, and so many of you know I was a workaholic and then I transformed my life, and she had the same experience as a workaholic and actually almost died because of it, and she shared her story today. We are on this show right now, and I invited her to come on to the Steve Show because we were talking about this word workaholic, which is her little book. Isn't that cool? A 12-step guide to having a life and getting things done. Because see, so many times we think that you have to have either or. You work and this is, and then you have money or whatever, but then you don't have the life that you want. And it's and she realized, wow, Steve's all about this, because this is what I talk about all the time, is how do we grow business and gain life. And so maybe share a little bit of the story of, like, let's go to the beginning part, that you were working so hard. I mean, I just looked online just a little bit. I think you said you have like 12 accreditations and
way too many at this point.
Yeah, so that means that you were working your butt off to get certified and all those things. And then that created demand for you to go speak and teach. But so tell me a little about those days. Like, what was that like, working so hard, and then how it shifted?
Yeah, I think it really started when I was younger. My parents, we were always, what I like to say, lower class posing is middle class, right? Okay. Because you have people that, you rack up their credit cards, or they buy things they can't afford. So you have, like, I think there's a whole just group of people that are living outside their means, right? And we always had humble beginnings and lived very simply. And my parents sacrificed to send my brother and I to a private school when they could barely afford it, but they wanted us to have a good start, right?
Right.
But I grew up with my parents always fighting about money and arguing about that, and it led to them divorcing, and that crumbled my world when I was a teenager. And I made the decision I never wanted to struggle, because I didn't want to end up like that. I didn't want to not be able to provide for myself or my family, or have my family crumble because of that. So I wanted to work hard and be successful, because I thought that's what we're supposed to do.
Right.
And I worked 3 jobs to pay my way through school, because in college no one else was going to pay for me to go. Okay. And by doing that, I started developing these habits. And I noticed years later that I never took a vacation day. And I never had a day off, because, 3 jobs and school full time, that's a lot.
Oh, absolutely.
And
just a little bit? No,
a lot of it.
Something else in. Yeah.
And what I realized was that, and what comes out in the Workaholic book, is that it's not about working for the sake of work. It was like I was trying to fill a void. It was like this insatiable thing, this hole. And it was my family falling apart, and me not wanting to be ever struggling. Right. And so I worked so that I would never have that, or have my life fall apart.
Yeah, so it's like to ignore something else, I'll fill my time.
Yes, and that step 11 is look at the why. And what's that bigger meaning behind what you're doing? Why do you do what you do? And that's on the positive and the negative. Why do you have these unhealthy habits? But why are you driven? Why do you want to, make an impact or inspire people for myself? And I had to really look deeper into that.
Yeah, so what's allowing you to do it? And I just want to point out, that's awesome that you know what your number 11 is. If I have something like, over 3, then I start forgetting which one's what number, so.
Yeah.
But back to the seriousness of it, is that it is, because if you're working for what, and then when it's like a false why, but the why is still real to you, because you're not, so I shouldn't say false, but that it's not the purpose that you truly want to live, I guess, is where I'm going.
Yeah, it's a why that's like a placeholder why.
Right.
It's like to fill the void. Like, you have the why of, I want to help people and inspire people, so I'm building my business to do that. But then the why really behind it, of the endless working nonstop, I think a lot of us, we're moving so fast, we don't stop to think about that.
No, you're in it, so you can't you can't stop. Yeah.
And for me,
it feels like you can't.
It does feel like you can't. And for me, it was, I didn't want to face what I was running from, of those feelings I never dealt with. I put it away in a box and said, I'm just never going to think about that pain again.
Right. Yeah. And so then, what was the turning point then? What or was it something that was it a slow evolution, or was it like a fast, like, what made the transition?
It was a can of tuna.
Okay.
Yeah.
Really?
So,
Okay, so now we got to know
all right,
what
so
this means.
picture this, Steve. So I'm downtown Chicago.
Okay.
Living right downtown.
Okay.
I'm doing consulting, good consulting.
Right.
I'm traveling, speaking, but I've got a client downtown Chicago. So one morning I woke up. The lights were already on. I was fully dressed in what I wore to work the day before.
Okay.
And I was on top of the covers in bed, fell asleep again with my laptop on my lap. Now that wasn't the shocking part. I was like, oh, it must have been like 2 a.m. I'm working until I just passed out. It was this lone can of tuna. I looked to my right. There was this lone can of tuna sitting there with a fork hanging over the side. That was my dinner. And I looked and I thought, how sad. Like, that is the saddest thing that one could have. Like, and I realized that was like a defining moment. It's a silly moment, but it's a moment where I knew I have to make a change. I cannot live like this.
Right.
And this isn't going to go anywhere good.
Right. Well, and it doesn't matter how big or silly it sounds to someone else. In that moment, it was a huge moment. It was like when you heard me, because I spoke today at NSA, and
that was a great presentation.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. And but I was bring up when that moment where I just looked in the mirror. Like, it was just a glance. Like, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm my dad, because I was going to bed late and waking up early. But you never, in that moment, I'll never forget. I know exactly the mirror. I could see the bathroom right now in my mind. I realized no. And it was just a glance in my own eyes. And luckily I took the moment to even look there, because most of the time, I did at that period of my life, even though my bathroom had a mirror, I remember going to work and then, using the restroom halfway through the day. And I look in the mirror, I'm like, oh shit, that's what I look like.
Yeah.
Because I was getting ready so fast to go to work, I didn't even look at myself. So that was it. So the fact that I just caught my eyes, I'm just saying it could be the smallest moment, but it's the biggest moment for your whole life.
Yeah.
So then what did you do? You had that moment, so then what? Like, then how did you make a change?
So some say that writing this book was a cry for help.
Oh, so the book came from that.
Yeah, the book came after that.
Okay, so right after that, or was it like right after, or you're like, I'm going to write a book about this, or like, how did you get there? I'm slowing things down for a moment. I'm like, okay, slow down the camera. Yeah, okay, yeah. So, because this is what's important, I think, for people, because they're sitting there looking at us and being like, oh, whatever, I'm still in this moment. So, they might be sitting with tuna next to them.
Right.
So let us know if that is.
You have a can of tuna next to you. There's hope.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so what did you do after the tuna?
So months had passed, and I started to realize that I needed to work smarter, not just like brute force harder. And I felt like I was bashing my head against this wall, right? Like, trying to push forward, trying to make stuff happen and launch my business. And you may be familiar with the ups and downs of the business owner.
Right.
And I remember I had steady income, and then I dipped down to zero a couple of times as I was trying to move forward with my business, because I realized that when I was consulting, I kept thinking, I'm getting paid too good to quit. Okay. And so I couldn't bring myself to truly do what I wanted to do, because I had this other thing and I was comfortable.
Right.
And then after a couple of years, that contract came to a close, and I realized I could have jumped into another contract, but I didn't. And I didn't because I thought, I'm going to make my business happen, and I have to put the attention toward that. And those were the zero dips, trying to figure out what to do.
Right.
And it wasn't until about a year later that I figured out how to get my business moving forward. And it was through focusing on a niche. It was many of the principles and concepts you talked about.
Right.
And what I found was that you don't have to put in that much work when you're doing the right things.
That's it. It's working smarter, not harder.
Absolutely.
Yeah, like throwing dirt all over doesn't help when you just need like a little bit of dirt right there,
Yeah.
or whatever it is. And it sometimes takes outside perspective to notice, or just like doing it enough times. You bang your knee on something enough times, maybe you decide to move that item, right? But so about a year later, is that when you wrote the book, or you kind of figured out and then you're like, you know what, I want to write these steps? Like, how did you come to the 12 steps? Like,
right. So, the first step is always admitting you have a problem.
Okay.
Right.
So that was the first step. Yeah.
And I started looking at, well, what are the other things? Well, setting boundaries, delegating, getting a hobby. Now, there's a dedication in here to a couple of good friends of mine, Laufer and Schlitz, and I had to reach out to them because they're fellow workaholics, and I said, guys, help me on this part, because as I was writing the book, I was struggling with a couple of the chapters. I'm like, hobbies. Let's talk about this. What is a hobby? So in each step, there's actually a definition of the word, assuming you might not know what it is.
Well, yeah, or it's so far from where you haven't been there since you were a kid.
Yeah.
Right, like I haven't had time for a hobby. It's like, so you had to relearn.
Oh, yeah, kind of, but also like it's the perspective.
Right.
It's the perspective of how you look at what you do and where you spend your time, and it's a conscious choice. And we don't realize that sometimes when we're in the mix of the busyness.
Right. And and that's one thing I've brought up other times. I have an episode that I talk about, you want to get more done, take more breaks.
Yeah.
And part of that, in that episode or in another episode, I can't even remember now, but it is, I bring up a little bit about hobbies, like having a guitar. Like right now I have a mandolin in my office, and I just mess around with it. I created a couple little songs that I made up, but in between I'll work like an hour or two, and then I'll pick that up and play for 5 or 10 minutes, and it just shifts the brain. It kind of resets. Especially, I've done some studying around the hemisphere work, and when you use your left and right hand and they're doing something different, it's like guitar or juggling. I've never was a juggler, but I picked up a little bit of juggling. I'm not that good at all, but just doing that in a break, and it's kind of like what you're saying. I don't know, because actually I just met Maria, so I haven't even read the book yet. But what caught me was this, and for all of you to know that me and you're watching the show, is that's where I was, for 12 years. And I was working not to work, and that doesn't work.
Right.
It just doesn't work. And even what we learn in neurolinguistics programming is we attach ourselves to things. So when I'm thinking, like workaholic, alcoholic, all these things, and we call ourselves that, I'm an alcoholic, and really, like, that's an identity name that we're calling ourselves. And what I've learned from one of my teachers, Carl Bouquet and Michelle Masters, they talk about separating that, because to say I'm an alcoholic is saying it's this one thing, right? And we're looking at it, but it's really not. We're actually a human that drinks. We're a human that works hard. And when you actually can separate those two and notice that I can be a human with or without this, then one, the choice comes in, and two, you can acknowledge this and say, is this serving me or not any longer? Because it might have at a certain period. There's usually always, comes from the same teachings, from the same teachers, there's always an intended positive outcome, right? Like even what you're saying, intended positive outcome is to hide myself or my feelings from something else, or, to work so hard that I'm not seeing something else. There's an intended positive outcome. So you're being, like, you worked it out in your mind, how you could feel better about yourself in that moment. So it felt good. And then at a certain point, it's like, you're looking at the tuna, you're like, that doesn't feel good anymore.
No.
And sometimes people don't do this for themselves, and so it's awesome that you were able to notice it yourself, because a lot of times it takes an outside perspective. And we can see this every day in our life, where there are people that are just keep going 10, 20, 30 years, and they don't have, I guess they don't eat tuna in bed. So, that's the trick. I didn't either. Like, I never really brought tuna in bed. I would always think, no, what if it spills on my bed?
Right,
like,
right.
You're risky too, huh?
Living dangerously.
Yeah, oh my gosh, tuna in bed, oh my gosh. Yeah. So, this is amazing. So then what happens? So you get the steps, you start being inquisitive and learning all these steps and finding from your friends. Then what happened?
Well, you'll appreciate the introduction on the book, because I talk about how there's this moment where I recognized I had to make a change. So I'm trying to figure out, well, how do I do that? And I started thinking, my background's project management. I do project management consulting. I thought, okay, I just need to identify the steps. I can articulate it clearly, then I can see them. I can visualize it.
Because you're super
then I can take them.
girl.
Yeah,
okay.
And then as I do that, I'm encountering more and more people that have the same challenge. I said, well, if I write them down, if I share them through a book, then I can help other people. And then through that, as I'm doing it, I can learn myself, and I can heal too. And then I realized I took the task of working less, and I turned it into a project of writing a book. It became work. So therefore, I think that I might still be broken, is how the intro goes.
Oh, okay.
Because it's an ongoing thing, right? We start to fall back into what's comfortable or what feels safe and what's helped us in the past.
Right. And I will say, is it okay if I say one thing about that? I feel like, I believe, and through, a lot of my mentors, is that none of us are broken, really, ultimately. Like, it's, there might be a different way to do things or evolution, but ultimately, like, everything you're going through is part of the journey.
Right.
Like, you probably wouldn't have wrote this book, and now just think, even if this impacts 12 people or 10 people, you're making an impact. So it's it's part of the evolution, you know?
Yeah.
It's just an amazing experience of life, right? That we have these continual levers. And, you know, I even want to say this, I've said this before, but it's like so worth repeating. When I first started doing personal development and changing my life like you have, I looked at myself and I said, I'm improving myself. Personal development is about making myself better. And I actually don't believe that anymore. Now I actually notice that I'm already me. Like, I'm already Steve, you're already Maria, and what we're looking at is actually peeling back those things that are actually restricting us, like that layer of your family or the layer of my family and this that happened to me and that happened to me. And as I peel back those layers, I actually allow my true self to be. Because, you know, your identity was to, you know, be a workaholic so that you can avoid that. That's actually putting something over your beauty of who you are.
Right.
So what I've noticed now is personal development, and what I've done and how I've invested in myself is actually to allow myself to be revealed, to actually be the person that I already am. That's where I don't believe anybody's broken. That comes back to that. You're not broken. You just have all this stuff on top of you.
Right.
Let's just move it off, and it takes one by one. It's like an onion. It's layers and layers, you know. So it's beautiful, like what you're describing, as we're like slowing things down, you know, just to look at each moment. So I'm curious, if someone was just getting started, they're looking at this and they're like, I'm still a workaholic. Maybe they found, you know, my series or this episode because they wanted that. If you only could tell someone one thing, like what would you say? If they were just getting started and they're trying to move away like both you and I did in our lives, what would be the one thing, or what's the starter that you suggest to people?
Yeah, so, you know, if I had to pick one thing, make me pick one out of 12 steps.
I know she's got the 12, but if like these are the last pages, or somehow it ripped it out, and you can choose which one. You only get What
I would suggest is you have to pause, take a step back, and reflect, because when we're in the mix of it, we can't see stuff the same as we could if it was someone outside of us, right? Or third party. And it's like you have a friend that's going through a bad relationship. You can clearly see why they shouldn't be in that relationship, but they don't see it. And they keep going back, right? So it's that clear. So if you can pause and reflect, and you might have to ask someone else for help with this, to say, hey, help me look at my situation. What I would encourage people to do is look for the 80-20. Because it's that rule that we hear over and over where, you know, 20% of the effort gets 80% of the results. And what is your 80-20? Because for a long, long time, I was doing the 80% of the effort to get 20% of the results, focusing on the wrong things. So if you can pause, take a step back, and look at what's going on, what's the real outcome that I want, and how could I get there smarter? Often, there's something you could do differently that when you can find that 20% that gets you the 80% of the results, that's going to free you up to not have to work all the time.
And that's magic right there.
Yeah.
You know, it's, and this comes back, so I can, even we haven't really shared what you do, but you are trained in Agile, right? And maybe you'll be able to describe it better, but isn't that a little bit what it is? It's like do something, then pause, reflect for a brief period, and then move forward again, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, that's one way. I mean, I know there's some more things to it, but just in that sense.
Essence.
But yes, use that in your life. So you can use this in your, and that's basically what I'm hearing you do. Like everything you're telling me, you took moments to reflect and then you built this. But so that pausing and reflecting is that amazing, amazing thing. And I've said it, actually, an episode that we recently did, I was talking about when things hurt, you know, like don't keep going. So many people say never quit. There's even people out there that say, you know, no pain, no gain. And I don't believe in that anymore. Like it's just not, when it hurts, that's your body telling you to pull back.
Do something different.
Yes, reflect and get outside. Just like she said, get outside advice. So I think that is beautiful. That is beautiful. Yeah. I think this is, it's amazing. And just sharing. So I guess as we get close to the end here of our time together, now what's the results? You know, like I know you've had iterations of this, right? Like with all your travel, you were sick, but maybe tell us a little about where you are now. Like how what's the, you know, are you still in the thick of it, or are you actually coming out? So where are things now?
Yeah, great question. So fast forward from that time, probably, dip down to trying to figure out what to do. I then figured out, like, everything clicked. I put enough work in, I did, the right adjustments, and got to a point where I had vertical revenue. So I went from hitting the ground, bank account going negative, to skyrocketing to over 50 grand a month.
Beautiful.
And that's the type of thing that we all want as we're starting a business. Like, when's it gonna break, right? When can I take off and be successful? So fast forward, I'm running an international consulting company, doing training for the largest companies in the world, Fortune 100, from IBM, Microsoft, Bank of America, Disney, traveling from Sweden, Vancouver, Morocco, Istanbul, Shanghai, Singapore, all over.
Wait a minute.
And so I wasn't working any longer just to fill that void, which was what was originally happening that I recognized.
Right.
But something else happened. And what that was is that I was working, and I was taking on too much and not realizing it. And actually about 3.5 years ago, I got rid of my home. So I started traveling one-way tickets around the world, looking for more opportunity to make a bigger impact.
Right.
And I started to get very sick a couple years ago, and I was in the hospital 3 times.
Wow.
My blood count dropped very low.
Wow.
So a normal person's hemoglobin count, or blood count, is 12 to 18. I fell down to 7.6, then 5.8.
Oh my gosh.
Each time going into the hospital for an emergency blood transfusion. And then after that, I figured out what was wrong. I had 3 tumors growing inside of me in my stomach. And the largest one got this big. And I was still traveling and trying to keep my business going, didn't want it to crumble. And nobody would know this. Nobody would know this from social media. Only a small group of friends are aware of this because I didn't tell the world. I thought people won't hire me, they won't hire my company, and everything I've worked for is going to come crashing down.
Well, hopefully you told people about this because it's too late now.
Yeah, yeah.
No, I'm kidding.
Well, and as we were speaking about earlier, it's being your authentic self. It's not something to be ashamed of, being sick.
I know.
And last year, I finally got healthy enough to have the surgery because I was so weak.
When you have that,
couldn't.
You can't even do anything so well.
I could have died. And
you're still working during all this time.
I was traveling through airports in wheelchairs and speaking from a tall chair in the front of the room. I almost passed out teaching in front of Microsoft in DC a couple of years ago. I had to call in another trainer friend to help me because I had to go to the emergency room. And it was one of those things where it was out of my control. I mean, how can you control if you have cancer or if you have a tumor or if you have, it's not something that you necessarily caused. Some could say it was related to stress, that's possible, but you can't just make it go away, right? Like what do you even do for that? And so that was a really challenging thing for me because all I know is how to push and how to work harder and how to make what I want happen. And when you can't move and you have no energy and you can't stand, and I was in a wheelchair for like half the year, and I'd be off the road for months, and I realized I have to slow down. And finally, when I was healthy enough to go in for surgery last year, I didn't even feel the same afterward. A couple of months, and even when I did go back to training, I was flying other trainers to meet me in the cities because the first place I went was Nova Scotia because IBM calls, and I'm like, oh, I got you, right? And so I'm still working, but 1 week on the road, I was out for 2 weeks. And I realized my capacity, and I couldn't do it. And I found out I had adrenal fatigue, which as much as you rest, you're not truly rested. And it gets back to stress. It goes back to that. And what I learned from all of that is what you said a moment ago. When something's hard, stop.
Right.
When you're pushing against something, that might not be the direction you should go.
Right.
And I believe that now, when there's a challenge, that's a change urge. Conflict is a change urge. And that means, what should I be doing instead?
Right.
How can you work smarter?
Yeah.
So meanwhile, I've been building my team, building other products that we can cross-sell, other offerings, other training things. And so it doesn't have to be a business around me. So the first round was, I have this void, and so let me just work and stay busy so I don't have to think about what made me unhappy. The second time around, it was out of my control. And I got shut down hard by life. And so what I believe that the lesson here is that we need to be mindful. And I love what your mission is, and I love your message because it's for all those business owners. And I realize that as the founder and president of an international organization, I have a limit. Right. And if we don't take that seriously, you hear the phrase, if you don't have your health, you don't have anything. And it's like, yeah, whatever. I've heard that. But it is so true. And I realized that, without any energy or ability to walk, I couldn't serve people. I couldn't make an impact.
You're done. That's why, the simple thing you go to is like when you're on an airplane, and I know you've traveled so much, you've been on a lot of airplanes. When the oxygen mask drops, who do you put on first?
You have to put on yourself.
Why?
Because if you don't help yourself, you can't help others.
No, if you're the one on the floor not breathing, everyone's got to help you. So then thereby you just stopped. So we have to take care of ourselves, and it's everything. And then you can start to have what you want. And what I found with I've had clients that have dealt with cancer, and they looked at change their diet and different things, but definitely like stress. And in The Secret, in the movie and the book too, they talk about several people that had cancer, and they went. I remember there's one woman, and she just watched all these comedy movies, and she made sure she laughed and everything, and her cancer reverted. I've had it in my life. Like, I've injured both my shoulders, I've hurt my back, I've done different things, and it's always in a moment when I'm going way too fast, and it's like the worst moment. You're like, no, my back can't be out, I've got so much to do.
Yeah.
And it's my life saying, so I find that if you don't listen to the clues, so that's why I try to pay attention, and now my life is so much better because I watch for the subtle clues. I can see them much more subtle, and then you don't have to have the big ones where life just slaps you across the face, right? As life was telling both of us, slow down until you go to there. And I haven't dealt with what you dealt with, but like I can relate to my life where like I've hurt my body to a point where I can't work. You just completely shut down, and that's where we go, like, to complete pass. I remember when I was shooting one of my TV shows, I slept about 90 minutes a night for about a 6-week period. Maybe once a week I was sleeping 4 hours, and I was on so much caffeine, eating caffeine mints, drinking caffeine, and I'm not talking about just coffees, Red Bull, all the stupidest stuff you could think of that I would never do now. People were like, what, you did that? And at the day when we had the wrap party, my body was so exhausted, I actually fell over. We were having the wrap party, and I only had one beverage that I didn't even finish. Everyone thought that I was drunk because I fell over, hit my head on a table, because my body was like done. It just made it to the end of the shoot. At the wrap party, literally my body shut down.
But was it worth it?
Well, I wouldn't do it ever again.
Yeah. Because there's a cost.
I mean, I think that it's awesome that I did that, but I also, that project is a longer story that we'll have to do on another episode because I'll just say this, like, the show we sold that show to MTV, and it did air in several countries, but then distribution was a whole crazy nightmare, and we ended up, it was a hard one for me to walk away from because we closed the United States MTV, and it was like $1 million deal. And then one of our actresses got an exclusive deal with Lifetime, and she was okay. The MTV, what they wanted was some changes in the show, and they said yes, but with these changes. And then we needed to shoot with her on camera, and then we were no longer allowed to because we couldn't afford exclusivity with her in our budget. So we lost her, and then I got it down to we only needed her for 1 day of photography, and then Lifetime still said no. I was dealing with their lawyers forever.
My goodness.
And then I tried to say, can we animate this? I was trying all these things, right? And it just wasn't working. I finally had to throw up the white flag, and I knew it was like $1 million loss in 3 years of my life. And it was the hardest thing. I had to tell my business partners, and we had some investors, and I had to tell everyone, hey, I can't go anymore. I just can't, and it was the hardest thing for me to do. And I went to bed that night still feeling horrible, but I woke up the next morning with like a relief off my shoulder. It's and it was one of those things that I wasn't giving up on. I was trying to break a rock, and it wasn't necessary. I had to go a different way, and life's gotten so much better. And so there's some projects maybe you can do it a different way, or maybe you're just on the wrong project.
Right.
So life gives us clues, and I think from what we talked about today, like, hopefully it just shows that you can do and have more if you just notice it. And if you don't, then life's going to slap you, and then look at, hey, what should I be doing? So I'm just thankful for you to share your story, because everyone here hears my story so often, and then to hear someone else that went through being a workaholic and now having more of the life that they dream and finding that balance and now being able to even teach others what you went through. I mean, just thank you for sharing.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. The real takeaway, I think, is if you work too hard too much, it can cost you your life. And it almost cost me mine. And it was one of the hardest experiences I've ever gone through. And where I'm at now is I travel when I want to, and I'm still building my team so that, I still take some gigs where it's like, oh, it's such good pay, I want to, take that. But I'm recognizing I was supposed to fly to Dubai and India next month. And I was feeling a little crunch. I was like, you know what? I don't have to, actually. I'll go in a couple months. I'll go in July. I don't have to go in March. So I just cleared my schedule for the whole month, and I was like, that feels amazing.
Right.
So to be able to travel when you want, where you want. And so I still travel on one-way tickets, but I make choices when to go. And I don't have that obligation. Whatever that obligation is, it's not real. Because we're in control of our own life, and we can make those choices. We think we can't. Yeah. You may think you can't, but you can. And that's what I think people need to remember.
I just had a woman in my mentorship from last year, and she's in my group mentorship program, and she has a twin sister, and then seen each other for years, and she kind of was starting to make plans, but it was going to almost take a year to see her twin sister that she totally loves, and it was devastating, so emotional for her. And she has her own business. She's a consultant like you and I are, and a successful one. And I said, oh, who makes your schedule? And then we worked on some other things because she actually believed she couldn't change her schedule. She changed her schedule, made the impact within 2 weeks. She had a scheduled trip to her sister, and we revamped her whole business. And now over the last 6-7 months, I think it's been that long, she has, right around 6 months, she's totally transformed her whole business, taking control of it. And that's what everyone needs to remember. You need to design your life and build your work around that.
Yes.
And live to your true self, whether you have a job or a business, and focus on that. And you already know how to do it because you're working and fitting life in. Hopefully you are. It sounds like you and I both didn't fit any life in at some points, but you're hopefully doing that. So you already know how to fit things in. So just flip-flop it.
Yeah.
Put your life and fit your work in.
Yes.
And look at that. And so, every year my wife and I look at where are we going to, what are we going to do first? What do we want to do? And then fit work around that. And that's an amazing thing. And it's through these stories, again, I know I said it already, but through these stories, hopefully you can get inspired because some people think, oh, this guy has this amazing life. She has this amazing life, gets to fly all over. And then, you don't realize what had already happened previous. And, it's like they say, oh, they're an overnight success, but it's like 10
years of an overnight success.
It's never that way. And it just takes the first step. And so you heard it from Maria, and I believe it too. Stop and reflect. When things hurt or they don't feel right, it's extreme when you put your hand on a grill and it's like, and you jerk away. But there's more subtle things that don't feel good. So follow your joy and then build everything around that. So when it doesn't feel joyous and you're not laughing and having fun, then pause, look at where you want to go, and then make the direction.
Yeah, and 2 tips for that. Sometimes you have to ask for help. You can't always do it yourself. And then the second tip would be find something else you love. And for me, it was DJing. So random, but I had a friend at a conference last year that forgot to book evening entertainment, and he asked my friend Nick and I to DJ. Now, Nick had a background in DJing. I did not. But I was like, that sounds amazing. Let's do it. And it was like this thing I never knew I loved, a passion I never knew I had. And I will say, when you have some marketing skills and branding skills, when you consult in it, it's easy to build an international DJ career when you're already traveling internationally. So, you're doing that now. And so I've DJ'd in Munich, I'm in Delhi, Hyderabad, and Bangalore, India, all throughout the US, from Seattle to Tampa to Philly to Chicago downtown. And I've discovered that this is a passion, this is something I enjoy, and it's that creative side. It's not the work side. So when you can find something, tap into a passion that is fun, that will pull you away from the work. So, when you stop and reflect, why are you working so much? What's the reason? What are you running from? What are you trying to fill?
Yeah.
And then when you can make the conscious choice, ask for help to do something different, and then find a passion you might not have ever known you had.
Right.
And that can help you to get more of that balance.
Right. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. You heard it, and those are things that you should definitely go and get out there and do. And what do you have to lose? You just take a chance and you do it. It might not be the thing, and then you move on. But if you're feeling compelled, I always say, if you feel the instinct, go for it.
Absolutely.
So I hope you gained value from this. In fact, why don't you let us know like what was most valuable? And we're both pretty active on social media, so why don't you let us know what if any that you want to know more of? If there's questions out there, we can answer. Maybe if there's another episode or there's something other topics you'd like to hear on the Steve Show, please let me know. And until next time, remember, choose gratitude and create freedom.